The watchmaker and the secret of stolen time. The crack that formed in Ethelberg's perfect order spread faster than Silas could have ever imagined. The wailing siren that echoed through the sterile avenues wasn't for a common criminal, a thief, or a dissident. It was for a memory freshly and impossibly reborn. Silas scrambled to act, his heart hammering against his ribs. He slammed the face of the ancient clock shut, plunging his dusty workshop back into its familiar gloom, but it was far too late. The energy from the umbral cog, a warmth that still pulsed in his palm, had already escaped. It had created an echo. Out in the Grand Central Plaza, a space usually defined by cold chrome, and the synchronized silent steps of citizens, something impossible had bloomed. For precisely 12 seconds, a phantom image of a forgotten world had superimposed itself over the present. A vibrant, chaotic flower market. Ghostly figures in archaic clothing haggled over bouquets of lavender and roses, their laughter a silent cacophony. The air, normally recycled and odorless, had inexplicably filled with the rich, earthy scent of pollen and damp soil. Hundreds of people, their daily mandated paths momentarily interrupted, froze in place. They stared, their faces a mixture of confusion, fear, and something else, something dangerously close to wonder. An elderly man, his face a mask of rigid conformity, just moments before had tears streaming down his cheeks, though he likely didn't even know why. A young child born into a world without color or chaos pointed a trembling finger, her eyes wide with a delight her parents had been trained to suppress. The incident was officially logged as a temporal disturbance, a benign technical glitch. But the Chronos Mandate did not believe in glitches. Have you ever seen something so impossible it makes you question everything you've ever been taught? That's what happened to hundreds of people that morning, a crack in the gray facade of their reality. And that was why Inspector Lyra was standing outside Silas's shop. Lyra was the Mandate's finest instrument. Young, sharp, and possessing an unwavering faith in the system, she saw emotion and memory not as human traits, but as chaotic variables that threatened the meticulous stability of Ethelberg. During her training at the academy, she'd been taught that memory was a disease, a corruption of the present by a past that no longer mattered. Her own parents had been early adopters of the Mandate's philosophy, willingly submitting to psychosocial conditioning that had sanded away the rough, unpredictable edges of their personalities, leaving them efficient content and emotionally sterile. Lyra was proud of this heritage. She was a pure product of the system she served. To her, the past was a closed book, and any attempt to reopen it was an act of sedition. Her investigation had led her here to this relic of a shop, the last of its kind, an anomaly in a city that had long since outsourced timekeeping to a central, infallible system. The old clockmaker was an anachronism, and anachronisms bred trouble. She stepped inside the little bell above the door, chiming a discordant, dusty note. The air was thick with the smell of old wood brass polish and something else, something faint and floral. Lavender. Just like the report on the Echo had noted. She dismissed it as coincidence for now. Her gaze swept the room, taking in the controlled chaos of gears springs and half-disassembled timepieces. It was a museum of a dead art. And there behind the counter was the curator. Silas looked up, affecting an expression of benign confusion. He was just an old man, a forgotten artisan lost in his work. He had to be. His life depended on it. Inspector, he mumbled, wiping his hands on an oily rag. To what do I owe the honor? Is one of my public clocks running fast? I assure you my work is precise. Lyra's smile didn't reach her eyes. They were the color of slate, and they missed nothing. Your work is not in question, Citizen Silas. I'm here about the disturbance in the Central Plaza this morning, a significant temporal anomaly. Our records indicate a localized energy surge originated from this sector. From this very address, in fact. The underlying conflict began a quiet war waged in the space between them. Silas feigned a quavering helplessness, his mind racing. An energy surge. Good heavens, my old equipment. It can be temperamental. It runs on archaic galvanic cells. Perhaps a capacitor blew these old things, not like the new perfect systems. He tapped the side of a brass chronometer, hoping the gesture looked authentic, and not like the frantic tick of a cornered man. Lyra walked slowly through the shop, her polished boots silent on the worn floorboards. She ran a gloved finger over a dusty workbench, leaving a clean streak. An anomaly of this nature, Silas would require more than a blown capacitor. Witnesses reported unusual sensory phenomena, visuals, scents. She stopped, turning to face him directly. Her proximity felt dangerous. He could feel the umbral cog hidden deep in his trouser pocket, pulsing with a faint warmth as if it sensed the threat. They reported the scent of flowers, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It's funny. I smell something similar in here. Lavender, isn't it? There it was. The hook, the connection he had prayed she wouldn't make. Silas forced a dry chuckle, a horrid creaking sound. Lavender. My dear Inspector, I wouldn't know a lavender from a lily. It's probably just my cleaning oil. An old family formula. It has a herbal quality, I suppose. He tried to keep his hands busy, fiddling with a set of tiny screws on his workbench, but he could feel her gaze on him, dissecting his every movement. He was a terrible liar. She didn't press the point. Instead, she circled the room, her questions weaving a careful net. She asked about his work, his history, how he managed to stay in business in a world that had no need for him. Her questions were casual, but each one was a probe searching for a weakness in his story. Silas answered with rambling, disjointed tales of his grandfather, of the lost art of clockmaking, of a time before the mandate brought order to their lives. He was playing apart the harmless eccentric, a living piece of history. People like a bit of the old world, you see. He explained, gesturing vaguely at the ticking chaos around them. A novelty. They say it has character. For a moment he thought it was working. Lyra's expression remained neutral, but she felt something stir within her. It was an unfamiliar feeling, a strange pang of something. Nostalgia. Impossible. Nostalgia was an inefficient emotion purged from productive citizens. Yet standing in this room filled with ticking, breathing history, she felt a flicker of a life she had never known, a world of imperfection and texture that was both repellent and strangely alluring. The scent of the wood polish reminded her of something from deep in her own conditioning, a memory fragment of a wooden block from her childhood nursery, a toy deemed unstructured and removed. This feeling unsettled her. It made her investigation feel personal, which was a professional failing. What do you think? Is it possible to completely erase who we are? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Finally, she seemed satisfied. Well, thank you for your time, Silas. We will continue our investigation into the energy surge. I would recommend you have your equipment serviced to prevent any further malfunctions. She turned and walked toward the door, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Silas allowed himself to breathe. He had survived. The umbral cog felt cool in his pocket again, but she stopped at the threshold, her hand on the door. She didn't turn around immediately. The silence stretched thick with unspoken tension. Silas's heart, which had just begun to slow, started to pound again. He watched her back, rigid and straight in her gray uniform. He knew this wasn't over. Then slowly she turned. Her slate-gray eyes fixed on him, all pretense of casual inquiry gone. They were sharp, analytical, and they held him pinned in place. Her gaze drifted for a split second to an old cuckoo clock on the wall, one with faded hand-painted roses around its face. Her eyes narrowed, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The peak of the tension arrived not with a shout, but with a quiet, devastating question that sliced through all his deceptions. "Tell me, Silas," she asked, her voice calm and dangerously precise. "When was the last time you saw a real flower?" Silas offered no reply, his breath caught in his chest. The question hung in the air, an indictment. His hand instinctively tightened around the umbral cog in his pocket, the smooth, warm wood his only anchor in a suddenly terrifying reality. He was caught. Lyra's eyes lingered on him for a moment longer, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. She knew. She didn't know how, but she knew the old man was hiding something far more significant than a simple technical malfunction. She departed, letting the dusty bell chime her exit, but the seed of doubt had been planted. And in Ethelberg, every seed, no matter how small, was meticulously tracked. The seed of doubt had been planted. And in Ethelberg, where every variable was monitored and every anomaly scrutinized, That seed did not go unnoticed. Lyra's report, with its inconclusive findings and its strangely poetic final question, was flagged by the system's logic filters. A human inspector exhibiting signs of curiosity beyond the scope of the investigation, a suspect who could not be immediately categorized, an unexplained scent of lavender. These were loose threads, and the Kronos mandate abhorred loose threads. The report traveled up the chain of command past supervisors and analysts until it arrived on a datapad that rested on a desk of pure black obsidian. The desk belonged to a man known only as the Proctor. He was the chief security architect of the mandate, a figure more myth than man to most citizens, including the inspectors who served him. His office was a void of white light and silence, containing nothing but the desk, a chair, and a single flawless sphere of suspended crystal that pulsed with the city's official unyielding time. To hunt a memory, sometimes you have to sacrifice a belief. The Proctor, however, had no beliefs left to sacrifice. He had replaced them all with cold, hard logic. He read Lyra's report, his face betraying no emotion. He noted her efficiency, her thoroughness, and then he noted the crack in her perfect record, the final unmandated question she had asked the clockmaker. It was an act of intuition, of emotion. It was a flaw. Inspector Lyra, he spoke into the empty room, his voice a calm, resonant monotone that was captured by a hidden microphone. A direct channel is now open. Miles away, Lyra flinched as the Proctor's voice materialized directly in her ear through her secure comms unit. Proctor, I was about to file my supplementary... Your report was sufficient, the Proctor interrupted smoothly. It was, however, incomplete. You have identified a subject of interest, but you have not identified the source of the anomaly. The clockmaker Silas. He is hiding something. You will place him under continuous covert surveillance, 24/7. I want to know when he sleeps, what he eats, who he speaks to. Find the source of this temporal corruption. Find it and eradicate it. Is that understood, Inspector? Understood, Proctor Lyra replied, her voice the model of efficiency. But as the channel closed, a cold knot formed in her stomach. The mission should have been simple, but her own question now haunted her. When was the last time you saw a real flower? The silence that had followed the look of profound, cornered terror in the old man's eyes. It had burrowed into her mind. That night, Lyra found herself parked in a darkened transport vehicle across the street from Silas's workshop. This was her duty, her purpose. But the lines felt blurred. She was supposed to be a guardian of order, but the echo in the plaza, an event she should have found repulsive, had sparked something she couldn't name. An uncomfortable flicker of interest. She watched the light in Silas's window, a single warm square in a city of cold blue-white illumination. Hours passed. The city outside grew still, its citizens tucked away in their sterile homes. Just as Lyra was about to log another uneventful hour, she saw movement. Silas approached the old clock that he'd slammed shut during the first incident. Her surveillance gear zoomed in the microphone, picking up the faint sound of a key turning. This was it. She leaned forward, her heart quickening. But what she saw next was not a public spectacle. It was something quiet. Something intensely personal. Silas took the umbral cog from his pocket. She could see it clearly now. A small dark wooden gear that seemed to drink the light and fitted it into the clock. He didn't turn the key to activate a citywide disturbance. He just whispered a name into the silence. Lena. The air in the workshop shimmered. A soft golden light the color of old honey emanated from the clock. It didn't explode outward. It coalesced. It formed the ghostly, translucent image of a woman with a kind smile, her hair caught up in a dance. The phantom figure extended a hand, and Silas, his face etched with a love so profound it was painful to watch, took it. The phonograph in the corner, untouched, began to play a soft, scratchy waltz. And in the middle of his dusty, forgotten shop, Silas began to dance with the memory of his dead wife. They moved in perfect silent synchrony, a private ballet of light and shadow under the gaze of the sterile moon. Lyra watched frozen. Her training screamed at her to report this. This was the source. This was the crime. An unauthorized manifestation of a defunct emotional memory. It was a gross violation of temporal purity laws. Her finger hovered over the alert button on her console, but she couldn't press it. Because for the first time in her life, Inspector Lyra felt a pang of raw, undiluted envy. She, a perfect citizen, had everything the mandate promised: purpose, stability, a life free from the pain of loss and the chaos of passion. He, a broken old man, had nothing but this impossible, beautiful ghost. And in that moment, she knew with a certainty that terrified her that he was richer than she could ever be. The envy was a physical ache in her chest. And as it crested, it triggered something else. An echo, but this one was her own. A fleeting internal flash, the feeling of a large, warm hand enveloping hers when she was very, very small. The rough texture of calluses, the scent of sun-warmed grass. It was gone in a microsecond, a memory fragment so deep it had escaped the mandate's erasures. But it left her shaking. Her faith had a crack in it. Now it was a chasm. In a move that defied every ounce of her training and discipline, she exited her vehicle. She didn't call for backup. She didn't file a report. She walked across the silent street, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and a strange, desperate need. She pushed open the door to the shop, the little bell announcing her intrusion. The waltz stopped. The ghostly image of the woman flickered and vanished. Silas spun around his face, a mask of pure terror, the umbral cog clutched in his hand. "Inspector," he gasped, stumbling backward. But Lyra wasn't the same woman who had interrogated him that afternoon. The cold certainty in her eyes was gone, replaced by a raw, pleading vulnerability. She wasn't here to make an arrest. She was here seeking an answer to a question she didn't even know how to ask. Her gaze fell on the empty space where the beautiful ghost had been. How she whispered, her voice barely audible. It wasn't an accusation. It was a plea. "How did you do that?" Silas stared at her, utterly bewildered. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the war between her duty and a newfound, desperate curiosity. He saw the glistening tears she was fighting to hold back. He saw a fellow prisoner of the system, one who had just realized the walls of her cell existed. He made a decision, a terrible, reckless, brilliant risk. "I didn't," he said softly, taking a step toward her. "It did." He held up the umbral cog. "It doesn't create. It only remembers what has been lost." Lyra stared at the cog, then back at his face. I don't understand." "You don't need to understand," Silas said, his voice imbued with a strange confidence. "You only need to feel. May I?" She didn't know why, but she nodded. Her rigid training, her entire identity screamed at her to stop, but the memory of that warm hand, her own personal echo, urged her forward. Silas stepped closer, and gently, his hand trembling slightly, he held the umbral cog before her. He didn't touch her. He just closed his eyes and concentrated, focusing not on his own loss, but on the chasm of loss he sensed in her. The world dissolved. For Lyra, the dusty shop melted away. The scent of lavender and old wood was replaced by the smell of freshly cut grass and a summer breeze. She was small, no older than 5, standing in a sun-drenched field. A man with kind eyes and a warm smile, a face she knew with a certainty that defied all logic, knelt beside her. Her father. He was holding a kite made of newspaper and string. His calloused, warm hand, the hand from her echo, was guiding hers, showing her how to tie a perfect knot. "You see, Lyra Bug," his voice echoed from the stolen past. "You have to give it enough freedom to fly, but enough guidance so it doesn't get lost." She felt the sun on her face. She heard his laugh, a sound so full of love, it filled the emptiness inside her she never knew she had. She watched as he let the kite go, and it soared into a brilliant blue sky, a sky far more vibrant than the pale, controlled dome of Ethelberg. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. A memory the mandate had stolen from her, deemed inefficient and unnecessary. And then it was gone. She was back in the dim, silent workshop, the weight of her sterile reality crashing down on her. The contrast was a physical blow. A choked sob escaped her lips. Then another. The perfect inspector, the mandate's finest instrument, crumpled to the floor. The disciplined dam she had built around her heart broke, and decades of suppressed emotion came flooding out in a torrent of uncontrollable tears. She wasn't crying for the memory itself. She was weeping for the person she might have been, for the love she never knew she had lost. The inspector was gone. In her place was just Lyra, and from a darkened alleyway across the street, a microscopic surveillance drone, dispatched the moment she'd left her vehicle, recorded the entire scene. It captured the light from the cog, the old man's gesture, and the inexplicable total breakdown of a top-level agent. The footage was transmitted instantly silently to the obsidian desk of the proctor, a man who saw emotion not as a tragedy, but as a sickness in need of a cure. In the proctor's sterile white office, the image of his finest inspector Lyra weeping on the floor of a dusty workshop was not a tragedy. It was a data point. It was evidence of contagion. Emotion, the ghost he had spent his life exorcising from the machine of society, had found a host. And like any good physician, the proctor moved to cauterize the wound before the infection could spread. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. With a simple, silent command, he dispatched the Epsilon team specialists in silent, overwhelming force. The sickness needed a cure. Back in the workshop, Lyra's sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. The memory of the kite of her father's smile was a phantom limb, an ache for something she couldn't believe she'd ever had. Silas knelt beside her, his face a mixture of pity and terror. He had taken a gamble, and now the consequences were coming for them both. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I had to show you. My father." She breathed the words foreign on her tongue. "They took him. They took that from me." Before Silas could respond, a new sound cut through the air. Not the wailing city-wide alarm from before, but something far more sinister, the faint rhythmic thumping of grav-dampened boots landing on the rooftops around them. It was a sound Lyra knew all too well. Epsilon team. They didn't use sirens. They were the mandate's ghosts. "They're here," she said, scrambling to her feet, her training kicking in over the emotional shock. "They know. The proctor saw everything. We have seconds." Silas didn't panic. He moved with a sudden, surprising urgency. This way quickly. He pulled on a heavy bookcase which swung inward on silent hinges to reveal a dark, narrow opening reeking of dust and decay. "When you're running from the people who control time," he said, pulling her toward the darkness, "the only place to hide is in the moments they erased." They plunged into the passage just as the workshop door imploded, splintering into 1,000 pieces. Figures in matte black armor flooded the room, their movements swift and silent. But their targets were already gone, swallowed by the city's forgotten history. They were now fugitives. They were officially the hunted. The darkness was absolute, a stark contrast to Ethelberg's perpetual regulated twilight. They were in the city's guts, the old service tunnels and pneumatic tubes from a bygone era, a web of pathways the mandate had sealed off but never bothered to destroy. Silas, it turned out, knew them like the back of his hand. He led them through the labyrinthine dark, while Lyra, her mind slowly recalibrating from shock to survival, became his navigator. "The patrol drones," she whispered, her voice hoarse as they paused at a junction of rusted pipes. "They'll be sweeping in a concentric grid pattern, collapsing inward from our last known position. Standard containment protocol. We have to move laterally east toward the old industrial sector. The infrastructure there is too dense for their thermal scanners to get a clean reading." They pressed themselves into a recess as the high-pitched whine of a drone approached. A brilliant white searchlight sliced through the darkness, sweeping across the tunnel just meters away. "Don't move. Don't even breathe." Lyra hissed, her body rigid. Its audio sensors can pick up a heartbeat at 20 meters. They waited frozen until the sound faded into the distance. The hunter was now using her knowledge against the hunt. It was a bitter irony. "How do you know these tunnels?" she asked, her breath fogging in the chill air once they were moving again. "My grandfather helped build them," Silas replied, his voice echoing slightly. "He believed a city should always have its secrets, a way to escape if need be. He never trusted men who promised perfect order." For hours they moved through the silent dark, their partnership a tense fusion of his ancient knowledge and her modern tactical expertise. They became ghosts in their own city, moving through the arteries that the mandate had declared dead. Their destination was a place that didn't officially exist on any modern map, a place known to the old ones as the data crypts. It wasn't a building, but a colossal cavern deep beneath the city's foundations. Here, mountains of obsolete technology lay in sprawling, silent heaps. Towers of discarded servers blinked with faint residual light. Rivers of tangled cables thick as a man's arm snaked through fields of shattered data slates. The air had a sharp metallic taste of ozone and decay, and was filled with the quiet crackle of short-circuiting hardware. It was a graveyard of information, a digital tomb for every inconvenient fact, every inefficient emotion, every memory the mandate had systematically purged. The air hummed with a low electrical thrum, the last dying whispers of a billion deleted stories, faint, corrupted audio clips from broken speakers played at random ghosts of forgotten advertisements and political speeches. I found it here, Silas said, his voice reverent as he led her toward a secluded alcove hidden behind a waterfall of fiber-optic cables. In his hand, the umbral cog seemed to hum with a faint resonant energy, as if it recognized its birthplace. He pointed to a small, dust-covered alcove. It wasn't in a case. It was just sitting there, waiting, as if it were made of something that couldn't be erased. In the alcove was a single hardened data vault, its surface scarred but intact. It was an old military-grade model shielded against the electromagnetic pulses the mandate had used to wipe the city's old networks. Lyra looked at it, then at Silas. Her training was screaming at her that this was a crime, but the memory of the kite, the feeling of her father's hand, was stronger. She knelt, her fingers finding the interface port. "Let's see what they worked so hard to bury," she said. With her inspector-level access codes still active for now, and some clever rerouting, she bypassed the archaic security. The vault hummed to life, projecting a flickering holographic file tree into the air. What they found was staggering. It was the Proctor's personal history. They saw a brilliant, idealistic young architect, one of the original designers of Ethelberg's temporal systems, a man who truly believed in progress. They saw personal logs filled with love for his wife and daughter. Then they saw the accident. It was raw, unedited security footage from before the purge. A public transport crash, a chaotic, terrible event caused by a single driver's moment of emotional distraction. The architect's wife and daughter were on that transport. The logs that followed were a descent into madness. They watched a video entry, the young Proctor's face, gaunt, his eyes burning with a grief so profound it twisted into a cold, terrifying philosophy. "They say love makes you human," his hollow voice echoed from the past. "They are wrong. Love is a vulnerability. It is a flaw in the code. A system that can be broken by one moment of distraction, one surge of irrational panic, is a failed system. I will not fail. I will build a new system, a perfect system, one where no one ever has to feel this tearing, ever again. I will save them from the chaos of their own hearts." Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cavern's temperature. He wasn't just a tyrant seeking power. He was a broken man who had weaponized his own heartbreak. He was a savior in his own mind. "He thinks he's merciful," she whispered to Silas, her face pale in the holographic light. As the final chilling log entry faded, "I will give them the gift of peace, a perfect, unbroken tranquility. They will thank me for it one day." The cavern around them was suddenly filled with the piercing screech of a citywide public address system. The Proctor's voice, calm and impossibly close, echoed from every discarded speaker in the crypt. He was talking to her. "I see you have discovered my private pain." Inspector Lyra, the voice resonated, devoid of anger, filled only with a chilling certainty. "Now you must understand. Emotion is a fatal flaw, a glitch that leads only to suffering. I am not a tyrant. I am the cure. That old man offers you a sweet poison called nostalgia, a brief warmth that will lead to the fire of grief. I offer you stability, peace, an end to all pain. Don't you see that my way is the only kindness that matters?" As he spoke, Lyra looked up from the glowing vault. At every tunnel entrance leading into the data crypts, a new light appeared. Dozens of them. The unmistakable focused beams of tactical plasma rifles. The soft thud of armored boots echoed from all directions. The Proctor's voice was the cage, and the armed soldiers of Epsilon Team were the bars. They were trapped, surrounded, not just in a cavern, but in the very heart of the Proctor's cold, broken logic. There was no escape. The Proctor's voice was the cage, and the armed soldiers of Epsilon Team were the bars. They were trapped, surrounded not just in a cavern, but in the very heart of the Proctor's cold, broken logic. There was no escape, but the Proctor, in his flawless, sterile calculations, had made one critical error. He assumed his logic was unassailable. He believed the cage was the end of the story. For Lyra, who had just rediscovered what it meant to feel it was the beginning of a new one, she rose to her feet, the tears on her face replaced by a fire Silas had not seen before. It wasn't the cold fire of an inspector, it was the hot, brilliant fire of righteous anger. "He's right," she said, her voice ringing with newfound strength in the vast cavern. Silas looked at her startled. "Right, Lyra, he's a monster." "No," she countered, her gaze sweeping over the approaching lights of the Epsilon team. "He's right that emotion is a weakness in his system. The poison he fears is also the antidote. He uses the city's network to control its citizens, so we'll use it to set them free." She looked at the humming data vault, then at the massive pulsing energy core at the center of the crypts. An idea wild and desperate bloomed in her mind. "Silas, your cog. You said it doesn't create, it remembers." "Yes," he said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Can it remember for everyone?" she asked, all at once. Silas looked at the umbral cog in his hand. It was warm alive, a repository of soul-deep moments. I don't know. The energy required would be immense. It would consume the cog completely. It would destroy it. It might destroy me." "He's going to destroy us anyway," Lyra said, her voice firm. "But we can choose how we fall. We can fight his soldiers with guns he gave them, or we can fight his entire philosophy with the one weapon he truly fears." She pointed to the data vault. "You can't kill an idea with a bullet, especially when that idea is your own memory." This was their final desperate gamble. Not to fight back, not to escape, but to unleash the very thing the Proctor had dedicated his life to containing. It was a revolution, not of bodies, but of souls. "Get to the energy core," Lyra commanded, her transformation from broken victim to rebel leader complete. "I need to get into the emergency broadcast system." As Silas scrambled towards the cavern's humming, glowing heart, the intense energy field making his joints ache, Lyra threw herself at the console of the data vault. Her fingers, once instruments of the mandate's oppression, now flew across the holographic interface, seeking to dismantle it. Alarms blared on the console as she bypassed security protocols she herself had helped design. A digital avatar of the Proctor's face appeared, its voice cold and automated. "Access denied. User Lyra, your credentials have been revoked." "Not yet, they haven't," she snarled, diving deeper into the system's root code, using backdoors and override commands she was never supposed to know. She was a ghost in the machine, using her intimate knowledge of the system to turn it against its master. Come on," she muttered, sweat beading on her brow as she saw the Epsilon team's life sign indicators closing in on her heat signature. A voice from a nearby speaker crackled to life, the Epsilon team leader. "Targets located. Central Cavern. Breach in 60 seconds. Lyra's heart pounded a frantic drumbeat against the methodical advance of the soldiers. She found it a backdoor into the city-wide emergency broadcast network, a system designed to give the Proctor instant total communication access in a crisis. This was the ultimate crisis, just not the one he'd planned for. With a final keystroke, a new icon glowed on her screen, broadcast channel open. She had access to every public screen, every speaker, every personal device in Ethelberg. "Silas," she screamed across the cavern, "it's open. Whatever you're going to do it now." Silas stood before the energy core, a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with the contained power of a small sun. The air around it vibrated, making his teeth ache. He looked down at the umbral cog, this small piece of wood that held all the love and pain of his life. He thought of Lena's smile. He thought of Lyra's tears. He thought of the millions of souls in the city above, living in a gray twilight, unaware of the vibrant colors they had lost. "Forgive me, Lena," he whispered, and with a final desperate prayer he plunged the umbral cog into the searing heart of the energy core. There was no sound, no explosion, just a silent, blinding wave of pure golden light. It didn't destroy, it radiated. It surged from the core not as heat or force, but as pure information, as raw, unfiltered memory. It hit the broadcast link Lyra had opened, and in less than a second erupted across the entire city. It was the memory storm. On a factory assembly line, a man performing a repetitive task suddenly dropped his tools, his eyes wide as he remembered the overwhelming joy of holding his newborn son for the first time. In a sterile high-rise apartment, a lonely bureaucrat saw an image of his own wedding day, the face of a smiling bride he had long been conditioned to forget, and he gasped, clutching his chest. On a perfectly ordered street, two strangers walking in opposite directions stopped, turned, and stared at each other as they were simultaneously hit with the shared memory of being inseparable childhood friends, laughing as they scraped their knees in a park that no longer existed. A high-ranking judge about to pass sentence froze as she vividly recalled the splintery feel of the wood and the immense pride of building a clumsy treehouse with her brother. A child who had only known the taste of gray nutrient paste suddenly tasted the phantom sweetness of a wild strawberry, a flavor from a life she'd never lived but her great-grandmother had. Laughter, tears, love, grief, anger, joy, the entire spectrum of human experience stolen and suppressed for decades came roaring back. It was a tidal wave of sensation crashing against the brittle dam of the mandate's control. The city's systems built for logic and order buckled under the onslaught of chaotic, beautiful human data. Screens flashed with random, joyful, and tragic images. Automated transports ground to a halt. The perfect synchronized clockwork of Ethelberg shattered into a million messy, glorious pieces. In his white room, the proctor watched it all on his master display, his face a mask of disbelief. He saw the chaos, the emotional contagion spreading faster than any plague. He tried to initiate a system-wide shutdown, but his commands were ignored, lost in the flood of resurrected data. The system was no longer his. Then the storm came for him. It wasn't a memory of his choosing. It was the one he had built his entire world to avoid. The image filled his vision not on a screen, but inside his own mind, more real than the room around him. His wife, her head thrown back in laughter. His daughter holding up a dandelion, her smile impossibly bright. He could feel the phantom sensation of her small hand in his smell, the faint scent of rain in her hair. He felt the feeling of the sun on his face, the sound of their voices, the overwhelming, crushing power of his love for them. It was a memory from the morning of the accident, and for the first time in decades, the proctor felt it all. The love, and then the catastrophic, soul-tearing pain of the loss that followed. The wall he had built inside his mind, brick by painstaking brick of logic and control, was annihilated. He screamed a raw human sound of pure agony and collapsed no longer. A proctor, just a man drowning in the grief he had tried to outrun. In the data crypts, the approaching Epsilon team faltered. One by one, they stopped their plasma rifles, lowering. One soldier stared blankly at the cavern wall, seeing not rock, but the face of his mother. Another sank to his knees, touching his own face as if feeling it for the first time, lost in a memory of his first kiss. Their mission, their training, their very identities as soldiers of the mandate dissolved in the golden light of their own reclaimed pasts. The emotional revolution was silent, fought not with weapons, but with the sudden, shocking return of the human heart. The silence that fell over Ethelberg wasn't the silence of order. It was the silence of revelation. The storm had passed, and in its wake, an entire city was just beginning to remember who they were. The silence that fell over Ethelberg wasn't the silence of order. It was the silence of revelation. The storm had passed, and in its wake, an entire city was just beginning to remember who they were. Weeks later, Ethelberg was unrecognizable. It was a city reborn not in chrome and glass, but in color and chaos. The omnipresent life clocks on every citizen's wrist were dark and silent, their countdowns rendered meaningless. They had become inert bracelets, relics of a forgotten tyranny. For the first time in generations, people walked at their own pace. They gathered in public squares not for mandated assemblies, but to talk, to argue, to share the strange, beautiful, and painful new treasures they had found within themselves. The gray walls of the city were being covered in vibrant, clashing murals. The sterile air, once perfectly filtered, now carried the scent of food being cooked in open-air stalls, and the sound of music, disorganized, clumsy, but heartfelt, being played on instruments that had been hidden away for decades. It was messy. It was inefficient. It was gloriously, beautifully alive. Leading this awkward, stumbling rebirth was the most unlikely of figures, Lyra. The mandate's finest instrument had become the architect of its undoing. She now headed an interim council, a collection of citizens from all walks of life, tasked not with controlling the populace, but with helping them navigate the overwhelming flood of their own humanity. Her days were no longer spent investigating temporal disturbances, but mediating disputes between families, reconnecting after years of emotional silence, organizing teams to cultivate real gardens in the sterile city parks, and simply listening as people told their stories. She was no longer an inspector. She was a facilitator of freedom. Of the proctor, nothing was ever found. He had vanished. When the new council finally entered his sterile white office, they found it empty save for the single crystal sphere on his desk, now dark and inert. He became a ghost story, a cautionary tale whispered about the man who tried to cure the human heart by cutting it out. The umbral cog its purpose served had disintegrated into a fine, warm dust in the heart of the data crypts, its immense power expended in its final selfless act. It had been a key, not a crutch, a tool to unlock what was already there. It had reminded them of a fundamental truth: their memories were not stored in a device, but within themselves. And Silas had found his peace. The energy required to unleash the memory storm had been his own. As he gave back every stolen moment to the city, his own final moments had slipped away. He had traded his lifetime for millions of them. His dusty workshop on the corner was no longer an anachronism. It had become a shrine. People left small offerings on its doorstep: a single real flower grown in a window box, a child's clumsy drawing of a smiling family, a faded photograph. They were small tokens of gratitude for the man who had reminded them how to live. Lyra visited the shop often. She would stand outside looking through the window at the beautiful, chaotic mess of gears and clocks, and remember the man who had sacrificed himself, not for an ideology, but for a feeling. He hadn't given her an order or a rule book. He had given her back a memory of a paper kite, and in doing so had given her back herself. One evening, as dusk settled over the transformed city, Lyra stood on the balcony of her small apartment. The lights of Ethelberg were coming on no longer, a uniform cold white, but a warm, chaotic jumble of different colors and intensities, a testament to the newfound individuality of its people. The air was cool, and carried the distant sound of laughter. Below her, in a small, newly planted park, she saw a young boy. He was running, his face tilted up toward the sky, holding the string of a kite, a simple, beautiful paper kite dancing and soaring on the evening breeze. A year ago, the sight would have been meaningless to her. Now it was everything: the memory of her father's hand in hers, the feel of the sun on her face, the soaring joy of the kite taking flight. It was no longer a painful phantom limb. It was a part of her, a foundational memory that gave her strength. She didn't weep. Instead, a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. She finally understood. The proctor had believed that power lay in controlling time, in bending every second to his will. Silas had known the truth. Real power, the kind that could remake a world, lay in the moments that fill those seconds. Ethelberg had been saved not by a grand strategy or a flawless system, but by the accumulated weight of 1,000,000 tiny, precious, and fiercely personal memories. Life, she realized, wasn't a clock to be managed. It was a story to be lived, measured not in the ticking of seconds, but in the richness of the moments we cherish.